Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for another of the Chamber's continuing programs focusing on COVID-19. We got a very interesting visitor with us today who I'll get to in just a moment. I just want to remind you that if you do want to submit a question, that you can do that using the question box. It's in the right. You can hit the red button and the box will pop out, and then you can see where you can submit questions. Click on questions and then you can submit it. My colleague Cynthiana with me is going to be watching your questions, and when it comes time, she'll share some of those questions. I always like to say up front, as hard as we try, we may not always get all the questions in. So be patient with us. We'll try our very, very best. So today, I'm really honored to introduce our guest speaker today, who is Dr. Arnold Monto, Professor of Epidemiology and Global Public Health at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, and Acting Chair of the Food and Drug Administration's Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee. And so today we're going to have a conversation about whether the vaccine is safe and is it effective. So welcome, Dr. Monto. So happy to have you.
Nice to be here.
So based on your expertise as the acting chair for the Food and Drug Administration's Vaccines and Related Products Advisory Committee, can you explain to our audience the process of vaccine authorization and approval?
Well, the first thing that happened with our committee was the FDA came, and we're advisory. We're an external group of experts drawn from various components in the United States, and there is an industry representative without a vote and a public representative who is typically a public health lawyer or something like that with a vote. And the first thing we did was look at the general guidance to industry, which needed to be in place because having an emergency use authorization is unusual for a vaccine. Vaccines are usually approved. It takes years to get to that point, demonstrating both safety and efficacy. And we were happy to find that the FDA was saying that the only difference between emergency use, because we are in a pandemic, and regular licensure was the duration of follow-up for safety, which was 2 months instead of 6 months. Efficacy was the same, and efficacy, they required 50% or higher efficacy against clinical laboratory confirmed COVID. And then the two vaccines that are licensed came up, one December 10th, first the Pfizer, and then the Moderna vaccine. And we looked at those and we were astonished. Well, the community was just astonished that 94, 95% efficacy, no in the Moderna trials, no severe cases of COVID. So we were extremely happy. We lucked out in many ways with this. One of the few things lucky about this virus is that the spike protein, antibody to the spike protein, seems to correlate with protection. They made the vaccine quite simply against the spike protein, and it prevented infection. Now, the question then is, going forward, what happens if the spike protein changes a little bit? And that's the story which I'm sure we'll get to when we start talking about the variants. So the process is the same, except for shortened timeline. That timeline is being provided by post-approval studies done by the CDC in particular, trying to talk about safety more long-term than the 2 months that were required for licensure.
It sounds like a very thorough process.
Yeah, and what happens, there's about a 2-week lag period between the time the company and the companies file standard practice with the FDA, and they get the raw data and they reanalyze the results. And at the meeting, there's a presentation from the sponsor of the company and a presentation from the FDA expert reviewer, and the data were identical. There was no problem, and it's because it was pretty clean. And the other good thing is there are various subgroups: healthy adults, people with underlying conditions, older individuals, and the results were almost the same in all of the age groups, which was really gratifying. The only problem we had was with the Pfizer vaccine. They wanted and got authorization down to age 16, and the numbers on the 16 to 17-year-olds were a little lower. They hadn't recruited as many, and therefore some of the pediatricians were voted no for the first for the Pfizer vaccine, and that was their reason. They wanted to see more numbers. With the Moderna vaccine, everybody approved the vaccine. One person abstained, but everybody approved the vaccine. There were no votes, which is very unusual.
Can you provide a current update on the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, how they're working, but then also talk about how many other vaccines are waiting for the emergency use authorization, and when might we expect to hear more?
Well, in terms of the second question, basically what I know, because we are the jury and we don't get inside information as the Data Safety and Monitoring Board, which other than the Pfizer vaccine, there's one combined Data Safety Monitoring Board that NIH, National Institutes of Health, is organizing. And I've heard through the grapevine, they've already looked at the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and are probably going to have another meeting. But what we do is driven by the submission from the company. And we do have some hold dates at the end of February. And I think the J&J vaccine is the one, according to things that everybody has available to, are going to that's coming up, and it's a one-dose vaccine.
Right.
The AstraZeneca vaccine, we've heard a number of things. It's licensed in Europe, but there's a separate trial in the United States, and through the grapevine, which is a public grapevine, we hear that they're doing some additional studies there. So that one is lagging a little bit. Then there's a more traditional vaccine that is being produced by Novavax, and that's further behind. The interesting thing is the mRNA vaccines, and the two we have are mRNA vaccines, a new platform. It's been around and in development for about 15 years, and it was chosen by NIH to push to use back when we had some of the other SARS viruses around, and they did it because it was a fast process.
Mm-hmm.
But we were, again, a few bits of luck. The fast process seems to have worked.
So you raised the topic of the variants earlier. Are the current vaccines that are approved and those that are going to be coming up in line, are they doing testing to see how their vaccines work with the new variants that have been identified?
Absolutely. What is happening right now is the simple stuff. The simple stuff is to make what they call constructs of the new variants so they can do not only binding assays, but neutralizing antibody assays. And then they see what antibodies the people who are vaccinated with the current virus have produced and see whether they neutralize the variant virus. And from what I understand, I think it's good with the UK variant, the one we now have around here in Washtenaw and Wayne counties, B117. I think there are some issues about not quite 94 or 95% with the South African variant, but we really won't know until we see how it's actually protecting in humans. And that's where the observational studies are coming. We're we're one of the sites, University of Michigan and Henry Ford, looking at how well the vaccine is actually working. That's a long-term approach. We'll know that. And what we're dealing with is probably somewhat similar to the flu vaccine, where the virus does change. Fortunately, coronaviruses don't change as much as flu viruses change. They have an error-correcting way in their replication cycle, but they are clearly changing. And again, public information. Moderna is looking at putting in one of the variants as the mRNA for booster inoculations, which brings up another issue. How long is the vaccine going to work? And we never know until we see it stop not working that well about duration. I would predict we may need booster shots like with flu. Simply from what we know, we've worked on coronaviruses, and there are 4 coronaviruses that cause common colds, and they reinfect people, just like a lot of, well, that's why we get so many respiratory infections, because we don't get solid immunity, we get partial immunity. And so we may need booster shots, but if that's what we need, we know how to do that.
So Dr. Monto, there's a portion of the population that is hesitant to receive the vaccine this year due to negative assumptions around the safety and efficacy. Based on your expertise, can you tell us about vaccine safety and what was learned from the clinical trials?
In the clinical trials, nothing really showed up. The only thing that there was, quote, a signal about was there was a kind of facial paralysis, Bell's palsy, in which there was one extra case in the vaccinated group, and this showed up in both trials. I haven't heard with all of the rollout now. You've got maybe 30,000 in the Moderna trial, 44,000 in the Pfizer trial. With all the millions of doses that have been given, we haven't heard about that. What we did hear about the night before the Pfizer vaccine came up for emergency use authorization was the anaphylaxis reactions, which are known to occur with all kinds of vaccine. You put something new in the body, and if you're highly allergic, like to bee stings or things like that, carrying an EpiPen, then there is a possibility of an immediate reaction. That has continued to occur. And CDC has had enough of them with the Pfizer vaccine to say that it occurs 11 per million. Very infrequent. But that's why even with the drive-throughs in Wayne County, they are asking the people to stay in their cars with the doors unlocked for 15, 20 minutes after they receive the vaccine. So we've got these kinds of things. Otherwise, if anybody's got the shingles vaccine, they know that you get a sore arm and you may not feel great for a while after you get the vaccine for about the first 48 hours. That's being seen maybe in 20–30% of people getting this vaccine. It's not as clean in terms of immediate side effects, the modest side effects as the flu vaccine, which those of us who get it every year know you get a slight sore arm and that's about it.
Right, right. So what is your advice to individuals who may still be hesitant to receive the vaccine even after hearing this information today?
Well, look at your neighbors. We're a dichotomized, a split population in many ways right now. Those who want the vaccine want it real bad. And then there are some people just who say, well, we may want to wait a little while. We've given it already to millions of people. And the 2 months was chosen because most vaccine reactions are seen in the first 6 weeks. So that's why they picked the 2 months for the emergency use. And we're going to be out at the usual time of about 6 months and a month or two. Get yourself ready to get the vaccine. Make sure you're linked in. The big problem we are having now is production. And
Right.
everybody wants the vaccine at the same time. This is a novel product. And vaccines are not that easy to produce. You've got to have dedicated facilities. You've got to have sterility. You've got to have the conditions being the same for each lot that's produced. FDA looks at this. And we haven't had any problems so far, like occasionally we've had with flu vaccine. I remember, I think it was 2004, one of the facilities, I think in the UK, didn't have had a problem, and we had a shortage that year. That was the year we finally expanded, I think, to under 50-year-olds. So we expanded it, and that was the year we had a problem. But there are, to me, if there's supply, there are no wrong arms. Everybody should get the vaccine. Right now, our prioritization is based on two things: likelihood of getting infected for frontline workers, especially first in healthcare, and risk of getting severe disease if infected, and that's the older individuals and next underlying conditions. And once we're past that, and that we hope will be in a month or two, then we've got the general population. And then that's when we're going to have to perhaps work on vaccine hesitancy. But the good news is by that time, we're going to have millions and millions of doses administered with very careful follow-up, because we've got to learn more about duration. We've got to learn about how to run our clinical trials, because we're not going to be able to put people in the placebo group anymore ethically. We're going to have to be comparing one vaccine to another, something like that, right, in our clinical trials. And we're going to have to redesign some of these studies. One of the arms in the, one of the groups in the clinical trials was older individuals. When we have a recommendation that older individuals be vaccinated, we can't give them placebo anymore. Right. So that's gonna, so it's like everything else with this fast moving situation, it's evolving.
I see we have some questions in our chat room from some of our attendees. It looks like a couple of them you've already answered with some of your responses to me, but I'm going to turn it over to Cinziana now to add a couple of questions.
Thank you, Tammy and Dr. Monto. I just want to say thanks so much for being with us today and sharing this wealth of information. We do have quite a few questions, so let's get right into it. So the first question is, if someone has tested positive for COVID-19, should they still get the vaccine?
The answer to that is yes. My own personal response would be, don't work quite as hard as those of us who have not got the vaccine if you're having problems in getting the vaccine. But you should be vaccinated. And the answer, the reason is this: this is a weird virus. It's done weird things in our communities with the transmission. Sometimes one person in a household gets infected and nobody else gets infected in the household. And sometimes everybody gets infected. And we have super spreading events and things like that. Things may change with this UK variant because it truly does seem to spread more easily. But we used to think that if you're infected, you're infected. We are finding with this virus, the more severely infected individuals get more of an antibody response than mildly infected individuals or asymptomatically infected individuals. And therefore, since the response is not uniform to infection, the answer is get vaccinated, because another surprise with this vaccine, at least in terms of antibodies produced, you get a better response with the vaccine than you do with, in a lot of cases, with natural infection. We always used to say we can't do better with our vaccines than natural infection. And with this one, for some reason, with the way the virus is being presented, and it may be this mRNA technique, we've never really had experience with this novel molecular technique. It may be that this is something we will need to look at with other in other vaccine development areas where we've waited for 30, 40 years to get a good vaccine.
Thank you for that. So the next question is regarding pregnant women. Is it safe for pregnant women to get the vaccine as well?
Nobody ever wants to do studies in pregnant women, especially the companies, because they've got the lawyers looking over their shoulders, and there are always going to be problems in pregnant women who are not vaccinated. There were pregnant women, even though it was an exclusion in the clinical trials, no problem for them. We are now recommending influenza vaccine for pregnant women. The WHO has this as its top priority because we know pregnant women get in trouble with flu infection. It's not as clear with this infection whether pregnant women get in trouble. Certainly there have been problems, especially if they get infected late in pregnancy. The CDC has not come out with a firm recommendation as they have with flu, that they should get vaccinated. But in general, people are saying, based on the data we have, if you are in healthcare and you are pregnant, get vaccinated. The risk of getting infection is so much more than the risk of getting this vaccine. And people talk about, oh, it's RNA. What could happen with the RNA? Fortunately, the RNA breaks down. One of the reasons we have handling issues in terms of the freezing and the rest is the mRNA is pretty unstable, and they have to stabilize it and with nanoparticles and all sorts of things in order to be able to inject it. It's gone in a very short period of time. It makes the body produce the spike protein to respond to, but it doesn't seem to be doing anything beyond that and is perfectly safe. Now, if you're in the first trimester of pregnancy, we're always a little worried about that group. And as the data comes in, I think everybody who is pregnant should consider vaccination, especially if they are at risk of getting infected. I'm thinking particularly of healthcare workers, essential workers who are in the front lines.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. So you talked a little bit about the booster vaccine or a potential booster vaccine in the near future. Can you tell us maybe when we can expect more information about the booster? Or I'm not sure if you can answer that directly, but we do have a question about that.
Well, that's the thing, we never know. We need to, fortunately, we've got 95% effectiveness of this vaccine. So we need to look at what we always call waning immunity. We work on this with flu all the time. With flu, the immunity starts going down so quickly that there's always a debate, should I get it early and should I get it in September or should I get it in November? The closer to the flu season I get the vaccine, the more effective it is. We have no idea whether this vaccine will wane that quickly. I doubt it based on the antibody that has been achieved. And I would hope that at the very worst, we will need a booster maybe every year. It also depends on what goes on with this virus. This is a weird virus. I remember being very heavily involved in research on, this is SARS-CoV-2, on SARS-CoV-1, the original SARS virus. And those of us here in Michigan remember they were having outbreaks in Toronto. And people were worried about going to Toronto for an event or something like that. And the virus, it went away. We predicted it would stay forever. This is not going away. It's all over the world. It isn't, and it transmits much more effectively than that virus. So anybody who says, I am absolutely convinced that, and gives you a prediction about this virus, don't listen to them. Because we've been wrong over and over again. And the good thing about this is most of us, the good spokespeople have been willing to say, I was wrong. Let's go ahead and do the right thing.
That makes a lot of sense. Sounds like it's going to continue being a learning process for a while.
Absolutely. This is novel.
Right. One more question before I turn it back to Tammy for our final remarks. So we do have a question about infertility. Does the vaccine cause that? Do you have any information around the concern about the vaccine causing infertility issues in women and men?
This is a point which I truly do not understand, because I'm not sure what kind of data people think they have about infertility. Infertility is something which has been brought up by people who are vaccine hesitant about every vaccine. And if you look at problems with the polio eradication program, one of the rumors that was going around in Pakistan and Nigeria was that this was a way to get rid of certain population groups. It was a plot. I think that we have absolutely no evidence that this vaccine produces infertility. I don't understand even what the biologic mechanism would be that this vaccine would produce infertility. We've got a lot of things to worry about with a vaccine that's being given to this number of people. For example, a colleague of mine on the ACIP, the advisory group recommending priority groups, was worried about the recommendation for giving it to nursing home residents. Why? Because nursing home residents have a much higher, obviously, death rate than the rest of the population. If you give it to nursing home residents, some of them are going to die who would have died anyway. And then there will be worries about vaccines causing deaths. It's the same kind of thing here, there, but even with less reason for worry. There is absolutely no evidence, and certainly not in a vaccine that's only been around for this length of time. Certainly this is something that's going to be looked at, but there's no biologic reason why there should be an effect on fertility.
Thank you so much, Dr. Monto, for answering all those questions. Back to Tammy.
Thank you very much, Cynthiana. Dr. Monto, one final question before we end this program. Looking ahead into 2021, and based on current vaccine availability and distribution plan, Can you predict when we might get back to herd immunity?
Well, with flu, we always say we're not going to predict. And then we predict because we go on the basis of past experience. Here we have no past experience to deal with. We worked with Corona. I'll give you my personal opinion, which is worth whatever one person's opinion is worth. This is the seasonal coronaviruses are seasonal. We get them during the winter months. I think seasonality has a lot to do with the peak we're seeing now. I was surprised it didn't go away during the summer, but there's no immunity in this population. I think that with bad behavior may have some good results, because some of the transmission we have seen in the populations that are driving this, namely younger adults especially, who are they're getting immune even without vaccine. Some people came up with this as a strategy. It's happening naturally. Plus the vaccine, I have hopes that things will start to get better as we get into the spring and summer, as long as we can keep up our vaccine supply. And I keep coming back to the supply issue,
Right.
because we can't, no matter how good we are at delivering, if there's no vaccine, we're going to have canceled clinics.
Right. Well, let's hope that the supply continues and increased supply will come, and then good distribution gets out across the country to all of the states, and then administration can be done in an efficient and quick way, because I know that's another issue. Dr. Monto, it has been such a pleasure talking with you today. We could go on for an hour, I think, with questions. You are such a knowledgeable person to be able to talk with. So thank you so much. I'll give you, would you like any final words before we end?
No, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I think we need to work all together to get this done, and to remember that the mitigation strategies have worked. We've demonstrated it over and over again, sometimes by opening up too fast and then it comes back, and then the mitigation strategies are put in place. It just reiterates the value of the strategies, and we just need to do some of the simple things. Some of them are hard, a lot of them are simple. The simple strategies that we have to try to control spread, especially if we've got this locally, got this UK variant, which seems to transmit with a lot less close contact than has been the case with the virus we've had around. So keep it up and work together, and we can all control this and live and go back to living normally.
Right. And we must say, as we do often when we have these discussions, everybody please remember to mask up.
Exactly.
Thank you, Dr. Monto. I hope you have a good day today.
Thank you.